So, good afternoon, Excellencies, delegates, distinguished panelists and guests. A very warm welcome by the organizer of the event, Zonta International, a more than 100 years old women's organization advocating for women's rights to make the world a better place for women and girls. We are also represented by Zonta International President-elect Fernanda Gallo-Freschi. And we are very honored by the support of the government of Costa Rica and the presence of Minister Councillor Veronica Garcia Guterres. A special welcome to the distinguished panelists and co-sponsors as displayed on the screen. And now this community reflects the importance of the topic to connect protocols and conventions with gender and inclusion of civil society in drafting guidelines and recommendations for implementation processes. To make the best use of the 50 minutes, we will display the bios of our speakers at the screen. Please start for the next slide, please. And we also distributed handouts with the bios. It is my pleasure to invite Her Excellency, Mrs. Veronica Garcia Guterres, Minister Councillor and Consul General, to take the floor and to address the audience.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much. I am very honored to participate in this panel, along with so many distinguished civil society partners, and to be able to contribute a little bit to this discussion concerning regulations on firearms with respect to the risk of gender-based violence and violence against women. The challenges caused by the proliferation and misuse of firearms are not gender neutral, but have instead distinct and differentiated impacts on women and men, boys and girls. As stated in the last UNODC report published in 2023 on gender-related killings of women and girls, and I quote, gender-related killings of women and girls represent the lethal endpoint of a continuum of gender-based violence, and they usually follow prior experiences of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. The global statistics on violence against women and girls are alarming. According to UN Women, on average, more than 133 women or girls are killed every day by someone in their own family, and 1 in 3 women have experienced physical or sexual intimate partner violence, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their lifetime. Moreover, violence against women and girls increases with war, conflict, and other global crises such as climate change. UN High Representative for Disarmament, Ms. Itsumi Nakamitsu, has made the point that the proliferation and misuse of over 1 billion small arms in circulation around the world exacerbate violence against women and girls. There's also a recognition in some of the treaties, for instance, in the Arms Trade Treaty, under which state parties must, prior to authorizing the export of arms, carry out a comprehensive assessment of the potential risks of exporting the arms, including whether the arms could be used to commit or facilitate serious acts of gender-based violence or serious acts of violence against women and children. Arms control and disarmament instruments are critical, of course, for tools of prevention. Thus, fostering gender-responsive approaches to arms control help address the root causes of violence and also contribute to the effective implementation of key global instruments and ultimately contribute to peace and security. However, like other human rights abuses, for instance, torture, there is no binding global instrument addressing this widespread human rights violation. For more than 30 years now, since 1991, there have been multiple instances in which the need for a specific binding global instrument of violence against women has been recognized. A call from government representatives and civil society organizations from all corners of the world has increased around this idea. My country is one of them, Costa Rica, along with 3 other countries, Antigua and Barbuda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Sierra Leone, have formally launched a call for the creation, adoption, and implementation of a new optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, dedicated to eradicating violence against women and girls. As you all know, CEDAW is an anti-discrimination human rights treaty. It has had a significant impact on gender equality. And although CEDAW addresses some forms of violence against women, such as human trafficking and child and forced marriage, the CEDAW is not comprehensive and does not address, for instance, domestic and sexual violence. Therefore, the CEDAW Convention, together with the Committee's recommendations 19 and 35, as well as the 3 regional treaties on violence against women in place, we believe these may constitute the framework for the fight against violence. As you know, the recommendations are not legally binding, as they are, well, recommendations, and the regional instruments in place leave as many as 75% of women across the world without protection from a binding instrument specific to violence against women and girls. So we firmly believe that the international community can do more and so much better to protect women. Therefore, it is with a great sense of urgency that we have committed to continue, and we have been embarking in informal discussions and exchanges on exploring the possibility of adopting a new optional protocol to CEDAW, precisely to dedicated to eradicate violence against women and girls, with the committee's jurisprudence as a basis, because we have this idea that the most widespread human rights violation, which is violence against women, needs to be halted and needs to be addressed. And we hope that this will be a first step to spearhead change in this regard. And we hope that you can all join us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you for this encouraging statement. This gives us hope to make progress with our gender-based violence working group and for non-state torture. And this leads to the next panelist, Ana Paula Oliveira. She was the initiator, more or less, of this working group. She is independent expert and affiliate to Kenneth. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ingeborg. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thanks to Zonta International, the government of Costa Rica, and all the co-sponsors for organizing this very timely side event. Today, I want to highlight in my speech the critical connection between firearms-related gender-based violence, in particular against women and girls, and organized crime, underscoring the importance to keep those discussions on international forums, such as what is happening today in this building, the Conference of Parties to the UNTOC. Gender equality and non-discrimination against women and girls are central to the work of the international community, as we heard, and is enshrined in several instruments, such as the CEDAW Convention, as well as in the Sustainable Development Goals 5.2, which calls for the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. Yet, despite these advancements in these frameworks, gendered approaches to combating transnational organized crime are often lacking. A recent a recent research that I was involved with, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, emphasized that efforts to address transnational organized crime often overlook women's perspectives in three main areas. One, the drivers to women's participation and the role they play within criminal groups that can be gender-specific. The differentiated ways women are affected by different criminal markets, and the crucial role women's-led organizations play in countering organized crime, which is often underfunded and underappreciated. So how this related with firearms-related GBV in organized crime contexts? This research found that the violence women face in criminal environments often mirrors the gender discrimination and violence that they experience elsewhere in society. Patriarchal norms and its intersection with other factors of discrimination, such as race, age, and social inequalities, exacerbate the risks women face to gender-based violence in areas controlled by organized crime. In these settings, it's found that cultural gang norms, embedded in hypermasculinities, create conditions that expose women further to violence and abuse. GBV at home is also a factor that drives women into gangs, for example, as a way to find protection from the abuse that they suffer and often end up in victimization. Firearms play a key role in this violence. Not only are firearms a key commodity to organized criminal groups, as you know, but they are also a tool to control and exert power over women and girls. The mere presence of firearms increases the risks of death and serious injury for victims. This can be manifested in intimate partner violence, femicide, or other forms of gender-based violence involved for women that are involved in gangs, but also affected by gangs. As we heard in a side event yesterday, femicide in the context of organized crime is a largely underreported phenomenon. This leads me to another point, which is the fact that women are more likely to fear retaliation and face stigma to report and seek for protection in criminal contexts. This influence perpetrated by criminal networks may exacerbate those feelings, keeping women and girls in silence and making their experience even more invisible, normalized, and away from the institutions designed to protect them. Moreover, although firearms are often culturally linked to masculinity, this doesn't exclude the fact that women can be as well as holders of firearms and make use of them. All these nuances from the intersection between criminality, criminal markets, and GBV highlights the need to better understand firearms-related GBV in illicit economies. Only with this evidence-based, better policies and programs to reduce violence against women committed by firearms in organized crime contexts can be more effective, breaking cycles of violence and intergenerational trauma within communities. A comprehensive approach, including crime prevention, gun control, and GBV prevention, includes addressing the interplay between legal and illicit firearms use and misuse in acts of violence, legal and technical aspects of firearms and GBV regulation, and especially the social, economic, and cultural drivers of violence through an intersectional gender perspective, which includes the participation of women and girls, victims, and survivors. In that sense, I would like to highlight two areas of focus. One is to say the development of stronger laws and policies to regulate firearms with a view to decrease firearms circulation when there is a risk of GBV. UNODC is already doing some research on this front, which I'm proud to be involved. This research identifies and compares legislative frameworks that restrict acquisition, possession, and the use of firearms by suspected or convicted perpetrators of GBV. It's important to assess how laws approach to the lethal risk of firearms and other weapons, and the use of legal powers to prohibit suspects or convicted persons from acquiring or possessing firearms, including as part of protection orders, sentence, release conditions, to seize firearms and ammunition or other weapons, or to require the surrender of authorization, license, and registration certificates. In addition to limiting civilian ownership, which would contribute to solving GBV, firearms-related GBV, it's also important to look at illicit markets when it comes to organized crime contexts. As good as laws can be, there's also a possibility for perpetrators to procure firearms in illicit markets. If we're talking about GBV in the context of transnational organized crime, much of this violence is expected to be conducted with illicit obtained weapons. This again underscores the need for more discussion on the gender drivers and impact of firearms, in particular violence against women and girls in the context of those illicit economies. These discussions are paramount to inform international forums such as we're having today, which has the potential to influence and shape the policies at the national level. In turn, can address the unique challenges faced by women in organized crime contexts. In other words, better understanding of the intersection of firearms, gender-based violence, and criminal markets can support gender mainstreaming in efforts of implementing the firearms protocol and other instruments designed to tackle illicit firearms market, and ultimately support efforts for effective solutions to protect women and reduce gun-related GBV. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thank you, Anna Paula. Yes, you addressed women's organization to involve more in all these policies and to connect crime, organized crime and gender rights. Thank you very much for this. And the next speaker is on the video, Carlton Watson, and we will start the recorded video now. Perhaps you can start the video. It doesn't work for me. Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Callum Watson and I'm the Gender Coordinator at the Small Arms Survey. It's a pleasure to be able to share this video with you, and I'll be traveling to Vienna tonight, so if any of you would like to talk about anything I raise in more detail, I'll be happy to do that throughout the rest of the week. What I thought I would do in this presentation is first of all provide an overview of some of the data we have on firearms-related gender-based violence, and second of all look at some of the efforts that have been made to try and address this through different policy interventions. So first of all, when we look at our global violent deaths database, what we find is that 45% of all violent deaths are committed by a firearm. Well, that was the case in 2021. I also want to highlight that 2/3 of global violent deaths occur in cases of intentional homicide, and under a quarter occur in cases of conflict, which is why it's so important that conferences such as UNTAG address this issue. When it comes to disaggregating the data, we find that the vast majority of those who are killed with firearms are men, and especially young men aged between 15 and 29. When it comes to women, however, 1 in 4 of those who experience violent death are killed with a firearm. What I want to show with these statistics, however, is that if we just look at deaths, we're not getting the full story, because there are often other forms of violence that are facilitated by a firearm. The very fact that the person is armed enables them to commit other crimes. And this is especially the case for sexual and domestic violence. And there are also wider human rights implications that often affect women or people of diverse genders, related to things like freedom of movement and their ability to participate in political processes. So it should seem fairly obvious that we need to have gender-responsive small arms control policies. When we looked at national action plans on small arms light weapons globally, we found that 2/3 of them mention gender, but only 1/3 of them mention the link between firearms and gender-based violence. When we looked at women, peace and security national action plans, we found that just over half of them do mention small arms and light weapons. However, just because a country has a Women, Peace and Security NAP, it didn't increase the chance of the small arms NAP mentioning gender, or if it did, the references weren't always coherent. So if we take Mali, for example, the Women, Peace and Security NAP talks about how male gender roles and weapons are linked, whereas its Small Arms National Action Plan talks about the role of women in civil society in raising awareness of the risks of small arms. So what this tells us is that these two policy communities aren't working together, and it's highly likely that people from the Women, Peace and Security community were not meaningfully participating in policy making related to small arms and light weapons. If we want international mechanisms such as CEDAW and the Women, Peace and Security agenda, as well as regional instruments on gender equality and violence against women, to contribute to reductions in firearms-related gender-based violence, they have to be integrated into national laws and policies that regulate firearms. So a couple of examples could be, first of all, empowering the judiciary and the police to suspend firearms licenses and confiscate firearms from individuals deemed at risk of committing gender-based violence. So in particular, we could imagine individuals who've had restraining orders taken out against them by intimate partners. Secondly, however, it's also interesting to explore the gender-related aspects of why people want to acquire weapons in the first place, noting that 90% of people, or well over 90% of people who own weapons in the world are men. And this is where links with Article 5 of the CEDAW Convention can be especially interesting because it talks about eliminating prejudices or stereotype roles for women and men. And sometimes these stereotype roles that encourage men to acquire weapons can be exactly the same stereotypes that legitimize or encourage men to commit gender-based violence against others. So to summarize, to prevent firearms from being used to commit gender-based violence, we need to first of all address gender-based violence facilitated by firearms, as well as cases where firearms are used directly. Second of all, we need to look at ways to bring international or other national legal provisions on gender-based violence and gender equality from CEDAW and the WPS agenda into national legislation that regulates firearms. And third, we need to look not just at the illicit supply of firearms, but also consider how gender roles play an influence in the demand to acquire and illicitly use firearms, including the cases of gender-based violence. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
We will thank Callum tomorrow for his valuable input about the importance of incorporating specific provisions on preventing gender-based violence, and we will have further discussion with him tomorrow. And now it is my special pleasure to invite Patricia Elias, the chief of the diplomatic campaign Every Women Treaty, to bring her perspectives for a new protocol.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend a special thanks to Zonta International, to Evelyn and to Evelyn and Ingeborg for inviting us and giving us the floor, and also to Kenneth and to UNODC. I am Patricia Elias, the Chief of Diplomatic Campaign of Every Women Treaty. Every Women Treaty is a coalition of over 3,900 women's rights activists, grassroots activists, and CSOs from all over 147 countries, working, advocating for a new optional protocol to CEDAW to end violence against women and girls. Every Women Treaty was founded more than a decade ago in 2013, following a call by the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls for a binding treaty. A global group of women's rights activists gathered to discuss whether a campaign was needed to push for this call, and our organization was born. Back in 2013, violence against women and girls was already among the most widespread human rights violation on earth. This, unfortunately, has not changed today. Then and now, the World Health Organization reports that at least 1 in 3 women suffer from intimate partner violence or sexual violence, or non-partner sexual violence, or both in their lifetime. 1 on 3 women. UNICEF's most recent report states that more than 370 million girls and women alive today, or 1 in every 8 girl, experienced rape or sexual assault before the age of 18. 1 on 8. The number rises to 650 million, or 1 in 5, when taking into account forms of sexual violence such as online or verbal abuse. UN Women reports that on average more than 133 women or girls are killed every day by someone in their own family, and usually the intimate partner. Said differently, more than 5 women are killed each hour by somebody from their own family and usually the intimate partner. Child marriage remains a huge problem. UNICEF reports that 650 million women and girls alive today were married before their 18th birthday. And the executive director of UN Women called it a rape, a legalized rape. Marrying child girls, is not a marriage. It's a legalized rape. And at the current rate, 9 million girls will be married by 2030. 9 million girls. Just to let you know, in Iraq, they are discussing to lower the age of marriage to 9 years old for girls. 9 years old. 9, yes. Abusive uses of technology have led to new, horrific, and pervasive forms of violence. 1 in 10 women in the European Union report having experienced cyber harassment since the age of 15. 1 in 10. A study in the Arab region found that 60% of women and girls were victims of online violence. Other country data vary from 49% to 85%. Intimate partner violence remains widespread and starts at a very young age, with nearly 19 million girls suffering physical or sexual violence by a partner by the time they turn 20. Moreover, firearms are linked to higher incidents of murder by an intimate partner. Abusers with firearms in the United States are 5 times more likely to kill their female victims. Numbers says. And abusers use guns to maintain power and control over their victims. Along with forced labor, the most common form of human trafficking is sexual exploitation of women and girls. Despite the egregious nature and global prevalence of violence against women and girls, there is no global treaty specific to the problem. CEDAW Convention is a great convention that gave us our right that we have today. Unfortunately, in 1979, when it was drafted, they didn't tackle violence, as domestic violence was considered something, family things. Later on, like 30 years after, they understood that violence against women and girls had to be tackled, and we had General Recommendation 19 that was updated by General Recommendation 35 that tackles ending violence against women and girls. What is the problem? The problem is general recommendations are just recommendations. They are not binding to states. And what we are calling for is to upgrade General Recommendation 35 to become a new optional protocol to CEDAW, dedicated to ending violence against women and girls. You will tell me that there are 3 regional treaties. There are the Istanbul Convention for Europe, Belém de Pará for Latin America, and Maputo Protocol for Africa. We want to take the best of the 3 conventions and to have this optional protocol to CEDAW. Just let me tell you something. The Istanbul Convention, that is the European Convention on Violence Against Women and Girls, was drafted, unfortunately, by Europe for Europe. They didn't consult with any South country or any country out of Europe. So we did a research, and the result was we were not consulted. How can we apply to this convention? So what we are saying is, let us upgrade all of those conventions to become the safest international human rights convention to defend violence women against violence against women and girls. Plus, the Istanbul Convention, drafted in 2011, missed cyber violence because there was no cyber violence. It was the start. So there is no cyber violence. It didn't tackle cyber violence. It didn't tackle femicides. They did also recommendation. But I mean, now to have women protected, you have to go and pick up from like 10 different things to have one protection. No, we need to unify and codify protection against violence against women and girls. The United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime is the first global legally binding instrument aimed at combating transnational organized crime in all its forms. This convention addresses issues such as human trafficking, smuggling of migrants, armed trafficking, and its 3 optional protocols. So this is a great example how the 3 optional protocols of this convention help strengthen the treaty body. And this is what we are searching to do with a new optional protocol to CEDAW, is strengthening CEDAW, strengthening protection for women and girls. In the same vein, so we are seeking to bolster the CEDAW framework through the creation of this new optional protocol to CEDAW. As mentioned, UNTOC plays a crucial role in addressing various forms of exploitation and violence, including human trafficking and gender-based violence. In these overlapping thematic areas, UNTOC and a new optional protocol to CEDAW will help, tackle all those forms of violence. And as I heard Mr. Callum before saying that we need to integrate specific measures on gender-based violence, preventing gender-based violence in the firearms policies, in the national policies, this optional protocol to CEDAW will do it, will integrate this in it. So, just to let you know, as the ambassador said, we have 4 countries that are calling for this optional protocol: Costa Rica, DRC, Sierra Leone, and Antigua and Barbuda. And recently, at the Human Rights Council, we had 10 other nations that joined that shows a huge diversity. We have from Africa, so Maputo Protocol, from Latin America, that is the Belém do Pará, and we have so we have now 14 countries calling for it. And last week in New York, we had also at the UN General Assembly, the African Union called and supported the optional protocol to CEDAW. So we are gaining momentum, and we need all of the states to join this call to protect women. It's half humanity we are protecting. Also, I would say that we had also in the UN General Assembly a meeting of international NGOs like Amnesty International, CARE International, Women Deliver, and we have Soroptimis, hopefully Zonta International, that are creating a platform to call for the optional protocol to CEDAW. And today I'm here in front of you to ask each and every one of you that has an NGO, that has a CSO, that has contact with member states to call for this optional protocol. I am available, I can give you my card, but we need to protect women against violence against women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you for this strong plea for a new optional protocol, and thanks again to Costa Rica to co-sponsor this event. And now first of all, I should show some of the biographies of Anna Alvazzi and Simonetta Grassi as the first one. So I'm very sorry that I did not click on this. Welcome to this board, and we would like to hear the takeaways you would give us from your perspective to this.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's really an honor and a pleasure for me to be here and to talk about this issue that seems so obvious, but is still not obvious to all of us. And I think that is the first thing that is important to highlight. I fully subscribe to what was said by all previous speakers on the importance of addressing the issue of gender-based violence, also in its relationship to firearms, for example, which is one very important aspect. From our side, especially I represent the firearms trafficking section in UNODC, so we are very much concerned with the illicit trafficking, manufacturing, but also the criminal use of firearms. And there, of course, we cannot ignore that there is a very specific gender dimension. And like the instruments that were adopted in other times, also the firearms protocol, also the organized crime convention is not so explicit about the need to address the gender dimension. But it is also not excluding it, and I think this is an important starting point. From our end, we have started to try to look closer at the gender dimension of firearms-related criminality, because we need an evidence base. We all know that having firearms at home or having the easy availability of firearms can increase the risk of any form of violence, but particularly violence against women, because it is not only a tool to hurt or to kill somebody, it emanates threat, the power that a person, a man or an individual can have to exercise its power against another person, a more vulnerable person. This is exemplified by the fact of having a firearm in the hand. So we are looking into it. We are also about to start a new iteration of our global study on firearms. We will start next year, most likely, and we have already decided that we want to have a stronger emphasis on the gender aspect, because we don't have enough information. We have been committing all the same mistake from our angle. We have been focusing on the firearm, on this cold iron item, and not looked enough at the human dimension. So we want to try to look at it. We have started with a more localized, more reduced study where we have tried to look in 15 countries at the gender dimension. And we're working also with Anna Paula on the comparative legislation on what can be done from a firearms control perspective to prevent gender-based violence. So these are little steps, of course, and there are some takeaways already, but much of it was already mentioned, so I don't want to lose much of this time. But we believe that looking also at the legislation and at what can be done from a regulatory point of view is one way to acknowledge the fact that gender-based violence exists and that it is aggravated by the availability, by the use of firearms. So if we can regulate something and acknowledge that there is a connection, it is maybe a first way to acknowledge the problem. The readily availability of firearms can become an aggravating factor for the risk of gender-based violence. As I mentioned, when it comes to organized crime, you mentioned the Organized Crime Convention. I think acknowledging the gender dimension in relation to organized crime, or also in relation to firearms, is a conditio sine qua non. There cannot be a full and effective implementation of either of these instruments if we don't acknowledge that half of the humanity, as was just mentioned, are differently affected by this. So if we acknowledge the gender dimension in organized crime, the gender dimension in the misuse and the trafficking of firearms, we contribute to a better implementation of these instruments. Without it, we would not be reaching full and effective implementation. And I think if we manage to convene this message to member states here now in the Conference of Parties, this would already be a very first step forward. Now, how would this relate to, for example, the ideas to have a protocol, an optional protocol on the CEDAW? I think it would create a bridge, a very good, very important bridge between specialized instruments that want to tackle very serious threats to human security, like organized crime. And because if we acknowledge the gender dimension in relation to organized crime, we are just acknowledging one form of gender-based violence. There is so much more gender-based violence that is not happening in the context of organized crime. But if we manage to recognize that full and effective implementation requires acknowledging the different gender dimension of the problem, we do a step forward towards acknowledging the problem of gender-based violence also outside of the organized crime context. Similarly, when we acknowledge the link, the role that firearms can play, we implicitly acknowledge that there is a gender aspect that is bigger than that. So we are not directly participating in these efforts for a protocol, but I would see this definitely as a very positive step forward, and clearly something that could become, or there could be linkages, a kind of bridge between efforts from the organized crime perspective to address the gender dimension and the much broader and much deeper efforts to address all forms of violence against women. So I hope that these efforts move forward on both directions, also here in the context of our fight against organized crime and the broader aspect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simonetta, for this motivating input, and we will try to connect all different parts to get a stronger protocol and other things. So, and now I would like to ask Anna for her takeaway. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. For me, this is particularly exciting because I love connecting people and different environments, different backgrounds, and I'm glad that this discussion really represents a building block of the creation of a new network, a new possible area, a new space for discussion. I think that our speakers have presented everything. Here I represent the civil society here in Vienna, the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, that is an umbrella organization that brings together several NGOs, but they are not necessarily the same as those dealing specifically with gender. Many of them do gender things. We have here the Committee on the Status of Women. We have a lot of important NGOs, but some of them, they are not yet perhaps thinking in gender terms. And we have very important initiatives, very important elements that may not be fully aware of what is going on in other fields. What we are talking about here is something that we can call the negative impacts of diversion and misuse of firearms. And so what we need to learn is to use gender-sensitive language for this. So the impacts for all, that is, impacts for men and women, boys and girls, and the language that explains and articulates who is going to be affected by these negative impacts. So what we have heard is something that for many years we have tried to promote, that, for example, in countries where you have a national focal point on firearms, this national focal point on firearms knows nothing about, for example, the gender focal point on women, peace and security, and they don't talk to each other, even though they have several issues that they have to deal that are overlapping and very similar. So the possibility to have also at the level of civil society better connection between these initiatives like the platform that Patricia was mentioning and initiatives like what we are doing here in Vienna, I think this is a necessary creation of a space. So it's something that I feel particularly excited to participate in. Last comment, as you may know, there is a civil society declaration that has been drafted, is going to be presented here on Friday, and it includes several issues that came out from the constructive dialogues of civil society. There is a section on firearms that is reflecting the need for mainstreaming gender in all possible aspects of the implementation of the firearms protocol, and making sure that there is a consideration of armed violence and the negative impact. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Anna, for this input, and I got already a sign that we have to close sharply at 1:50. So, yeah, but we have to skip question and answers. But we will repeat, we will reconnect us all for another event, hopefully for the 16 days of, I would like to give a last word to our President-elect, Fernanda Gallo-Fras.
Thank you very much. 40 seconds to go. So at Zonta International, all forms of violence against women are key focus areas for our service and advocacy at global and local level in 64 countries. Today, we have been reminded that this disgraceful practice is deeply ingrained in societies across all nations. It is used as a tactic in warfare. It is intensified by crises such as climate change, and it is further aggravated by the proliferation and misuse of over 1 billion small arms currently in circulation worldwide. So it's good to conclude that it is absolutely essential to integrate a gendered perspective into arms control strategies, as they are enablers of violence at all levels, not only in conflicts and in organized crime, but also among ordinary individuals who possess them. On behalf of Zonta International, I extend my sincere thanks to Her Excellency, Mrs. Veronica Garcia Gutierrez, and all our distinguished speakers for their valuable insights, and to our chair, Inge Björk-Geyer, and her dedicated team representing Zonta International here at UN in Vienna. My heartfelt congratulations and best wishes for a continued commitment towards the implementation of this optional protocol and all other related actions to our Zonta mission of building a better world for women and girls. Thank you very much. We made it just in time.